The sun blazed overhead, casting long shadows across the desolate land. For years, the galaxy had been a battlefield of power struggles and violent laws. But nothing could have prepared anyone for what was coming now. A war not for territories or resources, but for survival. The human soldier stood in the middle of the war zone, his heart pounding as he glanced around at the alien forces closing in from all sides. This was no ordinary fight. The enemy, the Zara, a brutal race of warriors, had made their move against humanity. The law of the Zara was clear. If a mate was killed, the other had to die as well. He had seen it before, and now he was in the center of it. Amidst the chaos, one sight stood out: an alien woman, tall and powerful, standing over the body of her mate. The Zara warrior had already fallen, but the law demanded his mate's life. As well, her eyes were filled with fire, the rage of a warrior scorned, but also the sadness of loss. She turned toward the human soldier, a flicker of recognition in her gaze. He had heard stories of these warriors, but he had never seen one up close. The rumors painted them as ruthless, heartless, and unforgiving. Yet as he watched her, he felt something different, a quiet strength beneath the fury. She wasn't just another soldier. She was a queen. The laws of the Zara were merciless, and the punishment for breaking them was absolute: death. But here, in this moment, the soldier saw something else. He saw the struggle of a people torn apart by their own brutal codes, caught between their duty and the fear of a life lost. He knew the law. He understood what was expected. The Zara queen would demand his life, but he couldn't help feeling that there was more at stake than just his death. He stepped forward cautiously, his rifle held loosely at his side. He didn't know what was going to happen, but he knew this was a decision that would change everything. The warrior queen's gaze didn't falter. She didn't flinch. Instead, she took a step toward him, and in that moment, the soldier knew he wasn't just fighting for survival now. He was fighting for something far greater, something that no law could take away. The soldier's mind raced. What was she going to do? The Zara were ruthless, and once a decision was made, it was final. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, he saw a flicker of doubt in them. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "You've broken the law," she said, her voice low, tinged with sorrow and anger. "I didn't break it. I just fought for the right to live," the soldier replied, his words steady despite the tension that filled the air. She nodded slightly, the weight of her own grief heavy on her shoulders. "Then you will die for it," she whispered, her hand tightening around the hilt of her blade. But just before she could strike, the soldier made a move that none of them expected. He dropped his rifle and knelt before her, offering his life on his own terms. His decision wasn't just about survival, it was about the power to choose. In this moment, he wasn't just a soldier. He was a symbol of defiance, a spark that could change the very foundation of the laws that governed the galaxy. The queen hesitated, her expression unreadable. The law had told her what to do, but something inside her stopped her from carrying out the punishment. Her hand wavered as she looked at him. This was more than just a fight. This was a test of everything she believed in. Was it the law that mattered most, or was it the chance for something different? The battlefield was quiet for a brief moment, the sounds of war fading into the background as the human soldier knelt before the Zara queen. His eyes were locked onto hers, a steady gaze that reflected both resolve and uncertainty. The queen's hand trembled slightly around her blade, her eyes searching his face as if looking for something, anything to explain his actions. Her entire being was built on a foundation of power, of dominance, of following the laws without question. But this human, this soldier, had dared to challenge that very foundation. She raised her blade, its gleaming edge catching the light of the setting sun. "You will die for your defiance," she stated coldly, her voice as sharp as the weapon in her hand. Yet, despite the harshness in her tone, Something inside her twisted, a small, unfamiliar feeling that she could not identify. Her instincts told her to strike, to bring an end to this human's life as the law demanded. But her mind hesitated. Soldier didn't flinch. His posture remained calm, his eyes never leaving hers. I fight for freedom. For the chance to choose my fate. You can't just follow the law blindly without considering the consequences, he said, his voice steady. The Queen's heart beat faster as she listened. She had never heard a human speak with such conviction. She had always seen them as weak, as prey to be controlled, but now she saw something different in him. Something that made her question the law she had spent her entire life following. Her mind raced, torn between duty and an unfamiliar urge to let this human live. The laws of her people were clear. If a mate was lost, the other was to follow. She had been trained to see it as a simple matter of life and death, nothing more. Yet, here she was, questioning it all. Was it really that simple? Could one law determine everything? You do not understand, she muttered, her voice barely audible as she struggled with her emotions. This is the law. It cannot be changed. Not even for you. The soldier shook his head, his resolve unshaken. Maybe it should be changed. Maybe we're all wrong to accept something just because it's been the law for so long. His words hung in the air like a challenge, daring her to consider what he was saying. For a moment, the Queen's grip on her blade loosened, her mind swirled with conflicting thoughts. She had been raised to follow orders without question, to uphold the law above all else. Yet, this human, this strange defiant human, had made her see the cracks in her belief system. Could one person truly make a difference? Could one act of defiance change the course of history? The wind shifted, bringing with it the scent of smoke and the distant sounds of battle. The war was still raging on, but in this moment, it felt far away. The Queen took a step back, her mind still racing. You may be right, she whispered, almost to herself, but it's too late for me to change. The soldier's gaze softened. It's never too late, he said quietly. There's always time to do the right thing, to choose your own path. The Queen's eyes searched his face, reading the sincerity in his expression. She had never met anyone like him. He wasn't afraid to stand up to her. He wasn't afraid to die for what he believed in. And in that moment, she realized that she wasn't afraid to die either. The Queen lowered her blade, the weight of her decision pressing down on her chest. She had made her choice, not based on the law, but on something far more important. Her own heart. She took a step toward the soldier, her voice steady now. I will spare you, for now. The soldier stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. Thank you, he said simply. But even as the words left his mouth, the Queen knew that this was not the end. This was just the beginning of something far greater than either of them could have imagined. The law may have been brutal, but they were about to create a new path, one that would be defined not by power or brutality, but by compassion and the courage to choose. The Queen's gaze hardened once more as she turned toward the battlefield. There is still much to be done, she said, her voice taking on a new resolve. The war is far from over. But this is only the beginning. The soldier nodded, understanding the weight of her words. The war was just a backdrop to the bigger battle they would both have to face against the law, against the system that had ruled them for so long. They were now allies, bound by a shared belief in something greater than the war that raged around them. The belief that they could change everything. And so, with a new purpose in their hearts, they turned toward the future, knowing that the path ahead would be difficult. But they also knew that together, they would find a way to forge a new destiny, one that would be defined by the choices they made, not by the laws that had once controlled them. The air was thick with tension as the battle raged around them, but within the quiet corners of the war-torn planet, something else was beginning to stir, change. The Queen, a powerful force of nature, had just made a choice that none of her people would ever have expected. She had spared the human soldier, a move that defied everything she had been taught. The law of the Zara was absolute, and yet she had chosen to break it. The question now was what that decision would mean for her, for the soldier, and for the galaxy at large. She stood tall, her posture unwavering despite the storm of thoughts that tore through her mind. Behind her, the soldier began to stand, his eyes scanning the horizon, ever watchful. The war was not over. The Zara were relentless, their laws cruel and unforgiving. But for the first time, the queen felt something stir inside her, something more powerful than the weight of her heritage. Doubt. The soldier had given her a new perspective, one that had never occurred to her before. For the first time she questioned the absolute nature of the law. Why should the death of a mate be the end for the survivor? Was that really justice, or had the Zara become prisoners of their own rules? Could she, a queen who had led countless battles, change the very foundation of her people's beliefs? She turned to him now, her expression unreadable. "What will you do now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty that gripped her heart. The soldier met her gaze, his eyes filled with quiet determination. "I will fight," he said, his words simple, yet filled with meaning. "I will fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. I will fight for a future where the law isn't what decides who lives and who dies." His words rang in the queen's ears, and for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. In all her years of war, she had never met someone so unwavering in their conviction. It wasn't about survival, it wasn't even about revenge. It was about something deeper, something more fundamental, the fight for choice, for freedom. For the first time, the queen felt as if she were standing on the edge of something monumental. The weight of the Zara's law had always been a burden, but now it felt like a chain. She had been raised to wield that chain as a weapon, to use it against anyone who dared defy the Zara. Yet here was a human, defying her, and she had spared him. Could it be that the law was no longer the solution? Could there be a better way, one that didn't involve the suffering and destruction of those caught in its grip? The soldier turned away from her for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the battlefield. The sounds of the conflict echoed in the distance, a reminder that time was running out. "The law might be what they follow, but it's not what I believe in," he said, his voice filled with resolve. "And I'm not the only one who feels that way. There are others who want change. They want to see something different, something better." The queen's heart raced as his words settled into her mind. He wasn't alone. There were others who shared his vision. The human soldier wasn't just fighting for his own survival. He was fighting for the survival of everyone who had ever been oppressed by the brutal laws of the Zara. In that moment, the queen realized that this was the turning point. This was where everything would change. "You're right," she said, slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "There are others who feel the same. There are those who want to break free from the chains of the law. But how can we convince them? How can we make them see that the old way is broken?" The soldier smiled slightly, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "We don't need to convince everyone. We just need to show them that there is another way. A better way." His words were like a spark in the darkness, a spark that could ignite a fire of change. The queen knew that the path ahead would not be easy. The Zara were not a people who took kindly to rebellion. They had fought countless wars to uphold their laws, to maintain their dominance over the galaxy. But the queen could feel it in her bones. This was the start of something new, something that would shake the foundations of the empire she had spent her life serving. As she looked at the soldier, she knew that she could no longer live by the old rules. The law had failed her, and it had failed her people. It was time to forge a new path, one where strength wasn't measured by obedience, but by the courage to change, to question, and to fight for a future where everyone had a voice. She turned to face him, her eyes filled with a new kind of determination. "Then let's start," she said, her voice clear and resolute. "Let's show them that there is a better way. Together we can change everything." The soldier nodded, his gaze unwavering. Together they would fight. They would face the consequences of their choices, but they would also create a future that was no longer bound by the chains of the past. The law might have been brutal, but it was no match for the power of their will. And as the queen and the soldier prepared to take the first steps toward their new future, they knew that the war was far from over. But this time they weren't fighting alone. They were fighting for something greater than themselves, the right to choose, the right to live, and the right to make their own destiny. The battlefields continued to burn under the heavy bombardment from the Zara forces. The soldier and the queen stood together, their eyes fixed on the horizon where the enemy was massing. The queen had spared his life, but in return, she had asked for his help. This was no longer about the law, about what was expected. This was about survival, about standing up against a system that sought to break them both. The soldier adjusted his gear, his eyes scanning the horizon as he turned to face the queen. She was not the same as when they first met. There was a new fire in her eyes, a new purpose that seemed to burn hotter than the sun overhead. She was no longer just a warrior following the law, she was a leader, a beacon of hope in the midst of chaos. "Ready yourself," she said, her voice sharp, yet there was an undercurrent of something softer, something he hadn't heard before. Soldier nodded, understanding that the war was now in their hands. They could fight as they always had, obeying orders and blindly following the law, or they could forge a new path, one of defiance, one that would change the galaxy forever. Queen was no longer just another alien warrior. She was an ally, someone who shared his vision for a future beyond the brutal rules that had defined their lives for so long. He knew that this war would not be won with weapons alone. It would be won with the strength of their resolve, with the courage to challenge everything they had ever known. They had agreed to work together, but neither of them could have predicted just how dangerous their alliance would be. The Zara were relentless, and now they had seen the queen's defiance. They would stop at nothing to crush her, to make an example of her and the soldier who stood by her side. But even knowing the danger, even understanding the cost, neither of them faltered. The soldier watched as the queen stood tall, her posture perfect, her gaze fixed on the enemy ahead. She was no longer just a leader of her people. She was a symbol of everything they could be if they dared to fight back. The soldier's heart raced, but it wasn't out of fear. It was out of something far more powerful, hope. "There's no turning back now," the soldier said, his voice firm as he stepped beside her. The queen turned her gaze toward him, her eyes filled with understanding. "We make our own destiny now," she replied, her voice steady, yet tinged with something deeper. They stood together, united in purpose, as the enemy forces began to move in. There was no more hesitation, no more second-guessing. The war was about to change. The battle raged on for hours, the two of them at the center of the chaos. The soldier's rifle never wavered, his shots accurate and swift. The queen fought alongside him, her blade cutting through the ranks of the Zara with precision and grace. It was clear that the laws of the Zara meant nothing now. They were fighting for something far greater than themselves. But as the fight wore on, the queen could feel the weight of her choices bearing down on her. She had defied the law. She had spared a human soldier's life, and in doing so, she had opened the door to a new world of possibilities. But now, the consequences of her actions were becoming painfully clear. The Zara would not forgive her for this betrayal. They would come for her, for both of them. The soldier noticed the subtle shift in her expression, the brief flash of doubt that crossed her face as she looked at the battlefield around them. He knew what she was thinking. He knew that the consequences of their alliance were now unavoidable. "We can't stop," the soldier said, his voice low but unwavering. "Not now, we've come too far to turn back." The queen's gaze met His, and for the first time she smiled, a small but powerful gesture. "Then we will fight together," she said, her voice filled with resolve. And so they fought, side by side, against the overwhelming forces of the Zara. Every blow they struck, every life they took, was a defiance of the brutal laws that had controlled their lives for so long. The queen was no longer just a symbol of oppression, she was a symbol of hope, of resistance, of the possibility that things could be different. But as the battle continued, the Zara began to regroup. They were not defeated yet. The war was far from over, and the price of defiance was steep. The soldier knew this, and so did the queen. They could not afford to let their guard down. The battlefield grew more chaotic by the minute, but amidst the chaos, the soldier and the queen remained focused. They fought together, their movements in sync, a perfect balance of strength and strategy. Each strike, each move, was a testament to the bond they had forged, to the trust they had placed in each other. And yet, even as they fought, the soldier knew that the true battle was still ahead. The law had been shattered, but what came next? What would they do once the war was over, once the dust settled? Would they be able to live in a world where the law no longer ruled them? Or would they be forced to face the consequences of their rebellion? The answer was unclear, the future was uncertain. But one thing was certain: they were no longer bound by the laws of the past. They had created a new future, one built on the courage to challenge the status quo, to fight for freedom, and to choose their own path. Asterisk. The fight had raged on for what felt like an eternity. The sound of blasters firing and the clash of swords filled the air. But through the chaos, the soldier and the queen stood strong. Their bond, forged in the fires of war, had become a beacon of hope. With each passing hour, they had driven the Zara forces back, their resistance proving stronger than anyone had anticipated. But despite their success, the tension in the air grew thicker, and the queen could feel the weight of what was to come. The Zara were relentless. No matter how many they defeated, the enemy seemed to multiply. The queen had known that the cost of defiance would be high, but as she glanced at the soldier by her side, she couldn't help but wonder how much more they could endure. "You're thinking too much," the soldier said, his voice breaking through her thoughts. He had noticed the change in her demeanor, the way she had started to retreat into herself. It was a side of her he hadn't seen before, and it troubled him. The queen didn't answer immediately. She knew he was right. She had always been focused on the future, on the path ahead. But now in the midst of the battle, she couldn't help but wonder if it was all worth it. The Zara had made it clear that they would stop at nothing to crush her, to erase the rebellion they had sparked. But then she looked at him, at the soldier who had risked everything to stand by her. She remembered why they had started this fight in the first place, to challenge the very laws that had kept their people in chains for so long. The Zara had made it their mission to rule, to enforce laws that destroyed anyone who stood against them. But now, together, they were showing the galaxy that one person could make a difference. "We can't stop," the soldier said, his eyes locked onto hers. "Not now, we've come too far." The queen nodded, her resolve hardening once more. She had chosen this path. She had chosen him. And now, there was no turning back. Together, they moved forward, fighting with a newfound intensity. The battle was no longer just about survival. It was about showing the Zara and the galaxy that they would not be ruled by fear or the law anymore. They fought for freedom, for the chance to change the galaxy for the better. Every blow they struck was a testament to the strength of their defiance. As the hours passed, the tide of the battle shifted. The Zara forces, once confident in their superiority, began to falter. The queen's leadership, the soldiers' determination, and their unshakable bond had turned the tide in their favor. The Zara were being pushed back, retreating before the force of the rebellion they had underestimated. But the queen knew that this was only the beginning. The victory they were claiming would not come without sacrifice. The Zara would not forgive them for what they had done. They would return stronger and more determined than ever. The real war was not just against the enemy forces, it was against a system that had been in place for centuries. It was a war against an empire built on brutality, on laws that crushed those who dared to resist. The soldier glanced at the queen, sensing the weight of her thoughts. He knew that the battle they were fighting was more than just a physical one. It was a fight for their very souls, for the future of their people. He reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We'll win," he said, his voice steady. The queen turned to him, her expression fierce. "We've already won," she replied. The soldier raised an eyebrow, confused for a moment. But then he saw the fire in her eyes, the fire that had ignited the rebellion in the first place. They had already won, not because they had defeated the Zara on the battlefield, but because they had shattered the system that had kept them in chains. They had broken the law. They had defied it, and in doing so, they had given hope to everyone who had been oppressed by the Zara, everyone who had lived under the rule of law that demanded death for defiance. The battle was still ongoing, but in that moment, the soldier understood. This war was no longer just about victory. It was about something much bigger: evolution. A new beginning. As the sun began to set over the battlefield, the queen and the soldier stood side by side, their weapons ready. They had fought hard, and they would continue to fight, but now, they fought for something more than just survival. They fought for the future, a future where the laws of the past no longer held power over them. The queen turned to the soldier, her eyes filled with determination. "This is just the beginning," she said, her voice filled with certainty. "We've won this battle, but the real fight is still ahead." The soldier nodded, understanding the truth in her words. "We'll face it together," he said. As the last of the Zara forces retreated into the distance, the queen and the soldier stood firm, ready for whatever came next. They had broken the chains, and now they would lead the way into a new future. The war had taken its toll. The battlefield was littered with the remnants of countless battles fought, bodies of both Zara and rebels scattered across the terrain. Yet in the midst of the carnage, the queen and the soldier stood tall. Their alliance had defied the odds, and now they were on the brink of something far greater. The final push was coming. The Zara, though battered, were not yet finished. They would fight until the last warrior fell, until the last breath was taken. But the queen and the soldier knew that this was their moment. There was no going back. Now, the tide of the war had shifted, and the momentum was on their side. The Zara had underestimated the strength of their resistance, and now they would pay the price. The soldier glanced at the queen, her eyes as sharp and focused as ever. She had become more than a warrior in these past days. She had become a symbol of defiance, of everything they had fought for. "I never thought it would come to this," the soldier said, his voice low, as they surveyed the enemy forces gathering in the distance. The queen's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "Neither did I," she replied. "But the law was always going to break us one way or another." Her words echoed in his mind, reminding him of everything they had fought for. The Zara law had been the foundation of their oppression. It had shaped their lives, dictated their every move. But now they were rewriting the rules. They had defied the law, and in doing so, they had ignited a fire in the hearts of those who had long been silenced. The soldier's thoughts turned to the future. What would happen when the war was over? What kind of world would they build together? They had fought side by side, defying the odds and overcoming every obstacle in their way. But now they stood on the edge of a new beginning, and the weight of that responsibility pressed down on them both. "We've come this far," the soldier said, determination filling his voice. "We can't stop now." The queen turned to him, her eyes fierce and unwavering. "We won't," she said. "We've won the battle, but the real war is yet to come. The Zara will never surrender." They will fight until the last of them is standing. The soldier nodded. Then we fight harder. We end this war once and for all. With a final glance at the Queen, he raised his rifle, ready to face the oncoming storm. The war was far from over, but they had already won something that the Zara could never take away from them, their freedom. As the Zara forces closed in, the Queen stepped forward, her blade gleaming in the fading light. She was no longer just a leader, she was a warrior, a symbol of resistance. The soldier was by her side, his weapon ready, but his heart was filled with something far more powerful than fear. Hope. Together, they charged forward, the ground beneath, their feet shaking as they advanced into the heart of the Zara army. The battle was fierce, the air thick with the sounds of war. The Queen's blade danced through the air, cutting down enemies with lethal precision. The soldier's rifle echoed in the chaos, each shot finding its mark. Together, they were unstoppable, their movements synchronized, a perfect balance of strength and strategy. The Zara, who had once believed they were invincible, were now realizing the true cost of their oppression. They had underestimated the human soldier, and they had underestimated the Queen. The rebels fought with the fury of those who had nothing left to lose, their every move fueled by the desire for freedom. The soldier's thoughts were clear as he fought. This was not just a war for survival, it was a war for everything they had lost. The laws that had controlled them, the systems that had kept them in chains, were now being shattered before their eyes. The soldier and the Queen had created something new, something stronger than the Zara could ever understand. Unity. As the final wave of Zara forces fell before them, the Queen and the soldier stood victorious, their bodies bloodied, but their spirits unbroken. The war was over. They had won. But even as the dust settled, they knew that this was only the beginning. The Queen turned to the soldier, a faint smile crossing her lips. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with quiet satisfaction. Soldier nodded. "We did," he said, but their victory was not the end. It was just the beginning of something far greater than either of them could have imagined. Together, they would build a new world, a world where the laws of the past would no longer hold power over them. A world where freedom and choice were not just dreams but reality. And as they looked out at the horizon, the Queen and the soldier knew that their fight was far from over. They had broken the chains that had held them captive for so long. But now, it was time to build something new, a new future, one that was theirs to create. The future was theirs to shape, and together, they would shape it. The final battle had come to an end, but the fight was far from over. The soldier and the Queen stood amidst the ruins, their bodies bruised and bloodied, their weapons still clutched tightly in their hands. The Zara forces had been defeated, but the war had left scars that would never heal. The galaxy had been forever changed, and now, the hard work of rebuilding had begun. The Queen gazed out across the battlefield, her eyes scanning the horizon. The victory was bittersweet. For every enemy they had defeated, for every battle they had won, there had been losses on their side. The rebellion had cost them everything. Yet, in the aftermath, they had gained something far more precious: freedom. The law that had once ruled their lives had been shattered, and with it, the chains that had bound them for so long. Beside her, the soldier stood in silence. He had fought beside her, had risked his life for the cause, but now he was beginning to understand the true cost of their victory. The war was over, but the peace would be much harder to achieve. They had defeated the Zara, but they had also defeated a way of life that had been ingrained for generations. What would come next? What would the galaxy look like in the wake of their rebellion? The Queen turned to him, her face tired but resolute. "We've won," she said, her voice filled with determination. "But the real work is just beginning." The soldier nodded, his expression grim. "We've broken the chains, but we still have to rebuild. We still have to ensure that the laws of the past don't rise again." She looked at him, her gaze unwavering, we'll rebuild, together. And so the work began. The galaxy that had once been divided by war, by the brutal laws of the Zara, now had a chance to heal. The rebellion that had begun with a single defiance had sparked a revolution. The soldier and the queen were no longer just warriors. They were leaders, the ones who would guide their people into a new world. A world where freedom reigned and where the laws of oppression no longer held power. They gathered their forces, uniting with other rebel factions that had fought alongside them. The Zara might have been defeated, but the power structures that had allowed their oppression to thrive still remained. It would take time, and it would take more than just military strength to bring about true change. The soldier and the queen knew this, but they also knew that they had something the Zara never had. Hope. As they traveled across the galaxy, they spoke to the people. They spoke to the workers, to the farmers, to the families who had suffered. Under the rule of the Zara, they explained that the war was not just about victory. It was about freedom, about giving everyone the chance to choose their own path. The laws of the past had bound them, had dictated their lives, but now they were free. They could create their own future. The Queen's voice echoed through the halls of the council chambers as she addressed the leaders of the newly formed alliance. "We stand at the dawn of a new age," she said. "We have the power to shape our own destiny. No longer will we be shackled by laws that serve only to destroy us. We will build a galaxy that is free, that is just, and that is united." The soldier stood beside her, his presence a reminder of the battle they had fought. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a symbol of defiance, a symbol of the strength it took to challenge the status quo. Together, they had shattered the old order, but now they had to build something new. The work was long and hard, but they were not alone. The galaxy had united in the wake of the war, and together, they began to rebuild. The Queen and the soldier worked tirelessly, forging alliances, creating laws that would ensure freedom for all. It wasn't easy, and there were those who still clung to the old ways, those who sought to regain the power they had lost. But the soldier and the queen were determined. They had fought for a new world, and they would not let it slip away. As the years passed, the galaxy began to change. The laws of the Zara were replaced by new, fairer laws. The people were no longer bound by fear, no longer controlled by the oppressive systems that had once ruled their lives. The queen and the soldier had built something lasting, something that would stand the test of time. But even as the galaxy began to heal, the soldier knew that their work was never truly done. There would always be challenges, always be those who would try to bring back the old ways. But he also knew that as long as they stood together, as long as they fought for what was right, they would continue to win. The queen stood beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. "We've done it," she said, her voice filled with pride. The soldier smiled, his eyes shining with determination. "No, we haven't," he said. "This is just the beginning. Together we'll keep fighting." And so they continued, their bond stronger than ever. The queen and the soldier had not only broken the law, they had changed the galaxy forever. The galaxy had begun to heal. But even as peace settled across the stars, the queen and the soldier knew that their journey was not over. The laws of the past had been shattered, but the future was still uncertain. They had won a great victory, but that victory was only the beginning. Now they had to ensure that the ideals of freedom, justice, and unity would not fade into the shadows. The queen stood at the balcony of the newly constructed council hall, looking out at the peaceful world below. It was a sight she had never thought possible, a sight that seemed almost unreal after everything they had been through. The air was calm, the streets bustling with life. The sun set slowly on the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over the city. This was the world they had fought for. This was the world they had dreamed of. The soldier approached her, his steps heavy with the weight of the years they had spent fighting together. He had been by her side through every battle, every victory and every loss. Now as they stood together, side by side, they saw the fruits of their labor. It was not just a victory for them. It was a victory for everyone who had been oppressed, for everyone who had dared to dream of a better future. "We've made it," the soldier said, his voice filled with a quiet sense of awe. The queen nodded, but her gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "We've won," she said softly, "but the real challenge is just beginning." The soldier stepped closer, sensing the weight of her words. "What do you mean?" he asked. She turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "We've built something new, something that's never been seen before. But the real test will be keeping it. The Zara were only one part of the problem. There are others out there, forces we don't yet understand. The galaxy is vast, and there will always be those who will try to tear it apart." The soldier looked out at the world before them, his eyes narrowing as he took in the sight. He had seen enough to know that peace was fragile. It was something that had to be nurtured, protected, and fought for every day. "We'll protect it," he said, his voice firm. "We've fought this far, and we won't stop now. We've broken the chains, but we have to ensure that no one ever has to suffer under that law again. We'll keep fighting, for as long as it takes." The queen's lips curled into a small smile. "I knew I could count on you," she said. They stood there for a long time, the weight of the years spent fighting settling between them. But now, it was a weight they shared, a weight they had both carried for so long. They had fought for freedom, for a future where people could live without fear. And now, they were the ones who would shape that future. As they looked out at the peaceful world below, the soldiers' thoughts turned to what came next. They had created something incredible, something that would change the galaxy for generations to come. But as they had both learned, change was never easy. It was a slow, difficult process. They would need to be vigilant to protect the new world they had created. "What now?" he asked, turning to the queen once more. Her gaze was steady, her eyes filled with a quiet strength. "Now we rebuild. We teach the galaxy what it means to live in freedom. We show them that a new world is possible, one built on justice, equality, and the choice to live without fear." The soldier nodded, feeling the weight of her words. It was a heavy responsibility, but it was one they would share together. They had broken the old order, but now they had to build something that would last. It would take time, and it would take effort. But they were ready. "We'll lead them," he said, a sense of certainty in his voice. "Together we'll lead them into the future." And so, with a renewed sense of purpose, the queen and the soldier turned back toward the council hall. The path ahead would not be easy, but they had already proven that they could overcome any obstacle. They had already defied the law of the Zara, and they had already changed the galaxy. The new world was waiting for them, and they would not let it slip away. As they walked side by side, their footsteps echoing in the quiet halls, the queen turned to the soldier with a sense of pride. "We did it," she said, her voice soft but filled with conviction. "Together, we did it." The soldier smiled, the weight of their journey finally lifting. "Yes, we did," he said. "And now we build. We build a future that's worth fighting for." And as the doors of the council hall opened before them, the soldier and the queen knew that they were ready for whatever came next. Together, they would face it all. Together, they would shape the future of the galaxy.